I said the wrong thing to my mini alien cat, Admiral. Now I can't leave her cabin. The human ship was unlike any other the crew had seen before. Its sleek, dark exterior gleamed against the backdrop of the distant stars, as if it were a shadow gliding through the endless expanse. The crew was a mix of various alien species, but there was one constant: respect. Each officer aboard had earned their place, their skills and strength respected by the entire fleet, but the human was different. Captain Elias Reed had been assigned to the Vanguard on his first mission, and his shipmates were still figuring him out. He wasn't a stranger to space travel, far from it. As a seasoned officer in the human galactic fleet, he had worked on various ships before. But this was different. This was a joint operation with the Zentari, an advanced species known for their discipline, intellect, and strength. The humans had a lot to prove, and Reed was the one to do it. One particular member of the crew had caught his attention: Admiral Nix, the commanding officer of the Zentari fleet. She was a being of grace and strength, her small, cat-like form an impressive contrast to the stature of most of the other officers. Her golden eyes shone with a quiet authority, and her short fur, a mixture of midnight black and silver, caught the light in ways that seemed to shimmer. Despite her diminutive size, her reputation was known across the galaxy. The Zentari were warriors, and Nix was their finest. Reed had heard stories of her rise to power, and how she'd earned the admiration of her people. She had become an icon for many, especially in the face of a galaxy that often saw the Zentari as an afterthought. It wasn't often that humans had the privilege of serving under an alien admiral, let alone one as feared and revered as Nix. So when Reed was assigned to her crew, he knew he had to be on his best behavior. But he wasn't prepared for the encounter that would change everything. The first interaction between them had been brief but telling. They met in the galley, where Reed was sitting at a table, fiddling with the controls on his wristband. Nix had entered quietly, as she always did. There was something about her that made her presence almost invisible, yet commanding at the same time. She sat across from him, her gaze intense but calm. She didn't speak at first, and Reed, unsure of what to say, made the mistake of offering a light-hearted comment. "So, Admiral," Reed began, smiling slightly, "I was just thinking, I never expected our fleet to be led by a kitten." He meant it in jest, a playful comment meant to ease the tension. He didn't realize it then, but it was the worst possible thing he could have said. Nix's golden eyes fixed on him, unblinking. The smile that had briefly been on her face faded, and Reed immediately realized he'd made a huge mistake. Her ears twitched, a subtle movement that Reed didn't understand the significance of at first. Her tail, which had been resting still beside her, flicked with an almost imperceptible sharpness. "That's a mistake you will regret, human," Nix said, her voice low but cutting, carrying an authority that only someone with her experience could command. Reed blinked, caught off guard. He had never seen her react this way before. He quickly tried to salvage the situation, but it was already too late. His words had struck a nerve. I didn't mean to offend you," he stammered, but Nix was already standing. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she rose, and the few crew members in the galley fell silent, sensing the tension in the air. "Follow me," she ordered, her voice final. Reed hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The entire room was now watching, and he could feel their eyes on him. It wasn't just Nix he had offended, it was the whole crew. He had insulted their admiral, their leader, their warrior. He stood quickly, trying to play it cool, though his heart was racing. Nix led him to her quarters, a small, well-ordered space that contrasted sharply with the cold metal of the ship. It was decorated with objects that spoke of her people's history: intricate carvings, woven fabrics, and strange devices that Reed couldn't identify. Without a word, Nix entered, and Reed followed her. The door slid shut behind him with a quiet hiss, and for the first time since arriving aboard the ship, he felt completely alone. The walls of the small cabin seemed to close in, and he stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure of what was about to happen. Nix didn't immediately speak. Instead, she walked over to her desk and began to collect some items. A small device in her hand buzzed softly as she fiddled with it, her back to him. Reed stood still, his thoughts racing. He hadn't meant to offend her, it was just a harmless joke, wasn't it? "Do you know why you're here, human?" Nix asked, suddenly breaking the silence. She didn't turn to face him. Reed opened his mouth to respond, but found himself unsure of how to phrase it. I made a mistake," he said, his voice quieter now. I didn't mean anything by it, I just— You called me a kitten, she interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Do you know what that means to my people? Reed shifted uncomfortably, his throat dry. He had no idea. No, he admitted, his voice small. Nyx finally turned to face him, her eyes blazing with an intensity that stopped him in his tracks. To call a Zentari a kitten is to insult everything we are. It is not a harmless joke. It is an affront to my culture, my honor. To belittle me is to belittle my people. Reed's stomach sank. He had only meant to break the ice, to ease the tension of working with such an intimidating leader, but now he could see that he had made a grave mistake. I'm sorry, he said quietly, looking at her with genuine regret. I didn't understand. I didn't mean to disrespect you or your people. Nyx studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. Then she spoke, her tone colder now. Sorry does not undo the damage, human. You will remain in my quarters until you learn the value of your words. You will not leave until I am satisfied that you understand the weight of what you have done. Reed blinked. Wait, what do you mean I have to stay here with you? Yes, Nyx replied simply. You will stay in my cabin and you will listen, you will learn. And you will prove to me that you have earned the right to share a ship with my crew. Reed opened his mouth to protest, but Nyx raised a paw, no, a hand. Do not argue, she said. It is a lesson you will learn one way or another. The door behind him clicked shut. And just like that, the human found himself trapped, locked in the quarters of the most feared admiral in the galaxy. He had no idea what was coming next. What he did know, however, was that this was only the beginning. He had a lot to learn, and a long way to go if he was ever going to earn Nyx's respect. The door to Nyx's cabin slid shut with a quiet hiss, leaving Reed standing in the center of the room. He felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him, his hands suddenly feeling clammy. He wasn't sure what to expect, but the way Nyx had reacted to his comment left him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake off. Nyx didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to make Reed feel like he was being scrutinized from all angles. She walked around the room, seemingly calm, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Her eyes never left him, and her movements were calculated, almost predatory. It reminded Reed of a big cat watching its prey from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. So Nyx finally spoke, her voice breaking the silence. You find me amusing, do you? Reed swallowed hard, not sure how to respond. I didn't mean it like that, he said quickly, his voice a little shakier than he intended. It was just a joke, something to break the tension, you know. Nyx tilted her head, studying him carefully. A joke? You made a joke about me in front of my crew. Do you understand the gravity of your words? Reed's mind raced, trying to find the right thing to say, but nothing seemed to come to mind. He had always been able to talk his way out of trouble in the past, but Nyx wasn't the type of person who would fall for empty words. She was precise, calculating, and she demanded respect. He had learned that the hard way. I understand now, Reed said after a pause, trying to sound sincere. I didn't realize that calling you a kitten was an insult. I was trying to make light of the situation, but I see now that it was wrong. Nyx stared at him for a long moment, her golden eyes unwavering. For a second, Reed thought she might just dismiss him, but instead, she walked to a nearby console and activated a holographic display. The image flickered to life, showing the faces of various Zentari warriors, each one powerful, fierce, and proud. These are the ones who have come before me, Nyx said, her voice softer now but still carrying an edge. Warriors, leaders, protectors of our people. Reed took a step closer, unsure of what she was trying to show him. The holographic images shifted, showing Zentari soldiers in battle, their bodies covered in armor that glinted under the light of distant stars. He couldn't help but be impressed by their strength, the sheer power they exuded. They were a people who had fought and bled for their survival, and Nyx was one of them. You see, Nyx continued, my people have had to fight for everything. We are small in comparison to many of the other species in this galaxy, but we are fierce. Every Zentari, no matter how small, is raised to be a warrior. We do not take insults lightly, especially not from those who do not understand us. Reed nodded slowly, feeling a growing sense of guilt in his chest. He had always seen himself as someone who could navigate different cultures, someone who could fit in no matter where he was. But he hadn't understood Zentari culture at all. He hadn't understood how deeply they valued honor and respect, and in that moment he realized just how far he had fallen short. I didn't know, Reed said, his voice quieter now. I'm sorry, I really am. I didn't mean to disrespect you or your people. Nix didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved back to the center of the room, her tail flicking behind her in a slow, deliberate motion. Reed watched her carefully, trying to gauge her mood, but it was impossible to read her. She was a master of control, and whatever she was thinking, she wasn't showing it. You will remain here in my cabin, Nix finally said, her tone still cool but not as sharp as before. And you will learn what it means to truly respect the Zentari. You will learn what it means to honor our customs, our traditions. Reed opened his mouth to protest, but Nix raised a hand, silencing him. You will not leave until I say you may, she continued, her voice firm. This is not a punishment, this is a lesson. You will not only apologize for your mistake, you will prove to me that you understand why it was wrong. Reed stood there, unsure of what to say. It wasn't like he had a choice. He had made a mistake, and now he had to pay for it. It felt unfair, but at the same time he couldn't deny that he had been careless. Nix was right. He didn't understand her people. He didn't understand what it meant to lead a species that had fought for survival at every turn. What do you want me to do? Reed asked after a long silence. How can I prove that I understand? Nix gave him a sharp look, her eyes narrowing slightly. You will start by learning about us. You will study our history, our culture, and our warriors. You will understand what it means to be Zentari. Only then will you be able to grasp the true weight of your words. Reed nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in his throat. All right, I'll do it, whatever it takes. Nix studied him for a moment longer, then seemed satisfied with his response. Good. You will stay here in my quarters until you have shown me that you understand. I will not make this easy for you. With that, she moved to a nearby console and activated another holographic display. This one showed a detailed map of the Zentari homeworld, a planet covered in vast plains and rugged mountains, where warriors trained and fought. The map zoomed in, showing various battlefields and strategic points, each one marked with symbols Reed didn't understand. This is where we come from, Nix said, her voice softening slightly. This is where our people have fought for generations. Every Zentari is trained from a young age to defend our world. We are small, but we are not weak. Reed watched the display, feeling a sense of awe building inside him. He had heard of the Zentari, of course, but he had never truly understood them. To see their history laid out before him, to see the battles they had fought and won, made him realize just how much he had underestimated them. You will study this, Nix said, pointing to the map. You will understand the sacrifices our people have made. And you will never again make the mistake of underestimating us. Reed nodded silently, feeling the weight of her words. He had a lot to learn, and he knew that it wouldn't be easy. But if he wanted to earn Nix's respect, if he wanted to prove that he understood the gravity of his mistake, this was where he would have to start. Over the next several hours, Reed sat at the desk in Nix's quarters, absorbing everything she showed him. He studied the battles, the warriors, the tactics that had made the Zentari one of the most feared species in the galaxy. He learned about their customs, their code of honor, and the immense pride they took in their strength and unity. As the hours passed, Reed found himself growing more and more fascinated by what he was learning. The Zentari weren't just a species, they were a force to be reckoned with. Every battle they fought, every hardship they faced, had shaped them into a people who valued strength, honor, and loyalty above all else. And in that moment, Reed understood. He understood why Nix had been so angry with him. He understood why his joke had been so offensive. He had disrespected not just Nix, but everything she stood for. And now it was up to him to make things right. When Nix returned to her quarters later that evening, she found Reed still studying the holographic displays. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time there was no hint of arrogance or judgment in his eyes, only respect. I'm ready to continue, Reed said, his voice steady. Nix studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good, you've learned the first lesson. But there is much more to come. And so the lesson continued, as Reed began the long journey of earning Nix's respect. One word, one action at a time. Reed woke up to the soft hum of the ship's systems, the steady sound filling the quiet space of Nix's cabin. He had spent the night studying, his mind buzzing with new information about the Zentari. The maps, the histories, the battle strategies, it was a lot to take in. The entire night felt like a blur of images and facts, each one more surprising than the last. The Zentari weren't just warriors, They were survivors, their way of life forged through centuries of struggle. As he sat up on the small cot where Nix had directed him to sleep, he rubbed his eyes and tried to shake off the sleepiness. He'd hardly slept at all. His thoughts were racing, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the Zentari warriors, strong, determined, and proud. He glanced over at the console in the corner of the room. The holographic displays were still active, the Zentari history and battlefields laid out for him to explore. Nix had given him a lot to think about, and now it was time to prove that he had learned. There was a soft click at the door, and before Reed could react, it slid open. Nix entered, her presence commanding as always. Her golden eyes quickly scanned the room, taking in his disheveled state, the data pads scattered across the small desk. She didn't say anything at first, just observed him with a quiet intensity that made Reed feel small. "You're still here," Nix said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "I see you've been busy." Reed stood up and straightened his uniform, still feeling the weight of her gaze. "I've been studying," he said, trying to sound confident, though he knew he wasn't quite there yet. "I've learned a lot." Nix nodded slowly, her tail flicking behind her with a slight, controlled movement. "Good, but learning isn't enough. Now you will demonstrate that you understand." Reed felt a tightness in his chest. "How? You will fight." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Reed blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. "Fight?" he asked, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Yes," Nix replied, her voice calm and firm. "You will spar with me. If you truly understand what it means to respect the Zentari, you will show it in action." Reed's heart skipped a beat. A part of him wanted to protest, to say that he wasn't prepared, that this wasn't what he had signed up for. But another part of him, one he didn't quite understand, knew that this was exactly what he needed. He had to prove to Nix that he was worthy of being there, that he wasn't just some careless human who had made a mistake and was now hoping to get out of it. "I'll do it," Reed said, his voice steady. Nix raised an eyebrow as if she were waiting to see if he would back down. When he didn't, she gestured to the small training mat on the floor. "Then prepare yourself." Reed took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had never fought against an alien, let alone one as skilled as Nix. She was small, yes, but everything about her screamed strength. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to give it his all. He stepped onto the mat, trying to appear confident even though his mind was racing. Nix stood across from him, her posture relaxed but poised, her eyes locked onto his with a steady, unblinking gaze. She wasn't just looking at him as an opponent. She was studying him, trying to see if he had learned anything from his time in her cabin. Reed squared his shoulders and assumed a defensive stance. He wasn't a trained fighter by any means, but he had some basic training. He had learned enough to defend himself when necessary, but Nix was something else entirely. He could see it in the way she moved, the way she carried herself. She was a warrior, and this was her element. Without warning, Nix lunged forward. Reed barely had time to react as she closed the distance between them with lightning speed. Her fist came at him, and he dodged just in time, the air rushing past him as she narrowly missed his shoulder. He countered with a quick jab, but Nix was already moving again, her body fluid and graceful as she avoided his strike with ease. She was toying with him, he realized. Every movement she made was precise, calculated, and effortless. She wasn't trying to hurt him, she was trying to teach him. But that didn't make it any easier. Reed focused, his body tensing as he tried to predict her next move. He had to remember what he had learned about the Zentari. They were not just strong, they were strategic. Their strength came from their minds as much as their bodies. Nix wasn't just fighting with her fists, she was fighting with her experience, her knowledge, and her understanding of combat. Another strike came at him, faster this time. He barely managed to block it, his arms aching from the force of her punch. He was starting to feel the exhaustion setting in, his muscles burning with the effort. But he couldn't stop. He had to keep going. For a brief moment, Nix stopped and took a step back. She was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. "You're not using your environment," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You are focusing too much on my movements and not enough on the space around you. Use the room, the distance. You must think, not just react." Reed took a deep breath, trying to steady his mind. He looked around, taking in the small space of Nix's cabin. There wasn't much room to move, but there was enough. He adjusted his stance, shifting his weight as he prepared himself for her next move. This time, he wouldn't just wait for her to attack. Nix moved again, but this time, Reed anticipated her strike. He sidestepped, using the small distance between them to his advantage. He saw the surprise in her eyes for just a fraction of a second as he dodged, and for the first time he felt like he was actually in control of the fight. He wasn't just reacting, he was thinking ahead, moving with purpose. As Nix closed the gap once more, Reed used his momentum to push forward, his arm aiming for her side. He didn't expect it to land, but he wanted to see how she would respond. To his surprise, Nix didn't block it. Instead, she sidestepped at the last second, grabbing his arm and twisting it in a fluid motion that sent him crashing to the ground. Reed groaned as he hit the floor, the impact leaving him winded. Nix stood over him, her golden eyes watching him closely. For a moment there was no sound, just the hum of the ship's systems in the background. Reed lay there, his breath coming in shallow gasps, trying to catch his bearings. "That's enough," Nix said finally, her voice soft but firm. She held out a hand, and Reed took it, letting her pull him to his feet. He looked at her, his body aching but his mind clearer than ever. "I didn't land a single blow," he said, his voice a mix of frustration and awe. Nix gave him a small, approving nod. "You don't need to land blows to learn, human. You need to think. You need to understand the battle before it even begins. That is the way of the Zentari." Reed nodded slowly, his mind racing. "I understand," he said, more certain than he had been before. He wasn't just learning about Nix's people, he was beginning to understand them. The Zentari didn't just fight, they fought with purpose, with intelligence. Every move, every action was calculated, and in that moment, Reed knew that this wasn't just about earning Nix's respect. It was about learning how to be a better version of himself. Reed's body ached all over from the sparring session. Every muscle felt like it had been pushed to its limit, and though his pride had taken a hit when he had failed to land a single blow, there was a strange sense of satisfaction deep inside him. He had learned more in the past few hours than he had in years of training back on Earth. As he sat on the small bench in Nix's cabin, trying to catch his breath, he reflected on what he had just experienced. Nix had been relentless, but in a way that had forced him to think, to adapt. He had learned not just how to fight, but how to approach the fight with strategy and purpose. Nix had given him the chance to prove himself, and though the physical part of the test was over, he knew that he still had a long way to go. The door to the cabin slid open, and Nix entered, her posture as composed as ever. She didn't say anything at first, just observed Reed as though measuring his progress. Reed, still winded from the sparring, glanced up at her. "Are you satisfied now?" he asked, his voice rough from the exertion. Nix gave a small nod. "You are learning, but it is not enough." Reed frowned. He had expected as much, but hearing it still stung. "What do you mean? I fought. I used strategy. I'm getting it, right?" "You are learning," Nix repeated, "but learning is not the same as understanding. To truly understand, you must grasp more than just the tactics. You must understand the reasons behind them, the honor, the duty, the respect." Reed felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been so focused on the physical aspects of the training that he hadn't fully appreciated the depth of what Nix was trying to teach him. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about a way of life. The Zentari didn't fight for glory or personal gain. They fought because it was their duty, because their survival depended on it. Every action they took was rooted in respect for their people, their culture, and their ancestors. "I'm not sure I get it," Reed admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've learned a lot about your people's history and combat skills, but what I don't understand is why all of it matters so much." Nix walked over to the console in the corner of the room and activated a new holographic display. This one showed a battlefield, not one from the past, but from a recent conflict. The image zoomed in on several Zentari soldiers, all of them in combat, their faces a mix of determination and resolve. "These are my people," Nix said, her voice quieter now. "These are the ones who protect our world, our way of life. Every day they face dangers, and they do so not because they are warriors by nature, but because they are bound by duty." Reed watched the scene unfold, seeing the Zentari soldiers fighting side by side, their movements synchronized and precise. It was clear that they didn't act for themselves. They acted for the survival of their people. It was a unity that Reed had never experienced, not in his own military service. Sure, there were comradeship and loyalty, but this was different. This was something deeper. "The Zentari are not just warriors," Nix continued, her gaze still fixed on the image. "We are protectors. We fight to ensure that our people survive, that our culture continues. Every life we take, every battle we win is for the greater good of the whole. We do not fight for glory, we fight because we must, because the future of our species depends on it. Reed absorbed her words, the weight of them sinking in. He had always thought of soldiers as individuals, brave men and women fighting for their own reasons, for honor or duty or country. But the Zentari were different. For them, the fight wasn't personal. It was collective. Every action they took in battle was an act of service to their people. He looked up at Nyx, seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just a commander. She was a leader in the truest sense, someone who carried the responsibility of an entire species on her shoulders. And she wasn't just protecting her people, she was preserving a way of life. I never thought about it like that, Reed said slowly. I always thought that soldiers fought for themselves, for their own reasons, but you fight for everyone. Nyx didn't respond immediately. Instead, she deactivated the holographic display and turned to face him. You are beginning to understand, she said softly, but there is still much for you to learn. Reed nodded, though he didn't know if he could ever fully understand what Nyx and her people had gone through. The burden of leadership, of responsibility, was something he had only begun to grasp. You've done well so far, Nyx continued, but now it is time to prove that you understand the true meaning of honor. Reed looked up at her, confusion clouding his thoughts. How do I do that? Nyx's golden eyes met his, and for the first time, Reed saw a flicker of something that could almost be described as approval. By showing that you will fight not just for yourself, but for others. By proving that you understand what it means to serve something greater than yourself. Reed thought for a moment. It was clear that Nyx was asking him to do something more than just learn about her people. She was asking him to put those lessons into action, to show that he could be part of something bigger. But how could he prove that? He had no idea what she was asking him to do. I don't know how to prove that, Reed admitted. I'm not Zentari. I don't have their history, their culture. How can I show that I understand? Nyx took a deep breath, her tail flicking behind her in thought. The greatest challenge you will face is not in combat, but in understanding sacrifice. You must learn to think beyond yourself, to consider what is at stake for others, and act with that in mind. That is where true honor lies. Reed didn't speak. He felt the weight of her words, but he still wasn't sure how he could apply them to his own life. He had always acted on his instincts, focusing on the immediate situation and how it affected him or those closest to him. But Nyx was asking him to think on a much larger scale, one that included not just his survival, but the survival of entire species, entire cultures. He stood up, still processing everything she had said. I'll do my best, he said finally, his voice quiet but determined. I want to learn, I want to understand what it means to be part of something greater. Nyx gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. Then you have already taken the first step. The rest is up to you. With that, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving Reed standing in the center of the cabin. He had a lot to think about, a lot to learn. But for the first time since he had entered Nyx's world, he felt like he was on the right path. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a human soldier, fighting for his own survival. He was part of something much bigger now, and the honor of earning that place in the galaxy was a challenge he was ready to face. Reed woke up earlier than usual the next morning, his mind still spinning from everything that had happened the day before. The intensity of the sparring match, the lessons from Nyx, it all felt like a whirlwind, and yet something inside him had shifted. He was no longer just trying to prove himself to Nyx. He was trying to prove something to himself. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the ship systems. He sat up on the cot, rubbing his eyes as he tried to shake off the exhaustion from the day before. It was strange. He had never expected to be so drained by something like this. But Nyx's training wasn't just physical, it was mental. And that was the hardest part. He had spent the last few days learning about the Zentari, absorbing every piece of history, every battle strategy, and every cultural lesson Nyx had shared. But it wasn't just about knowledge anymore. It was about applying what he had learned and showing Nyx that he understood the deeper meaning behind it all. The door to the cabin slid open, and Nyx entered without a word. Her presence was as commanding as ever, her eyes scanning Reed with the same cool intensity she always had. She didn't speak right away, instead walking over to the console to check the ship systems. Reed stood up, a little unsure of what to expect. I've been thinking, Reed said, trying to break the silence, about what you said yesterday about fighting for something greater than ourselves. Nix paused, glancing over her shoulder at him, and, Reed took a deep breath, I think I understand now. It's not just about fighting. It's about knowing why you're fighting and who you're fighting for. It's about loyalty, duty, and honor. Nix studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as though evaluating his sincerity. Then she nodded. You've learned much in a short time, human, but it's not enough to understand the theory. You must prove it. Reed felt a jolt in his chest. How? Nix's golden eyes were sharp as she stepped closer. By facing a challenge. Reed was about to ask what kind of challenge she meant when the ship's intercom crackled to life. The voice of the communications officer came through, interrupting their conversation. Admiral Nix, we've detected an unknown vessel on an intercept course. It's moving at high speed and appears to be heavily armed. We've tried to communicate, but there's no response. Nix's expression shifted slightly, but she remained composed. Very well, prepare for immediate action. I'll be on the bridge. She turned to Reed, who felt a wave of panic rise in him. He wasn't ready for this. He hadn't even begun to prove himself as a soldier, and now he was being asked to face a real threat. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. You want me to come with you? Reed asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty bubbling inside him. Nix's gaze locked onto his. Yes, you will stand beside me. Now move. Reed quickly followed her as she strode out of the cabin, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. They made their way down the narrow hallways of the ship, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the metal corridors. Nix was already deep in thought, her mind focused on the task ahead. Reed struggled to keep up, but he was determined. This was his chance to prove that he had truly learned from Nix. It wasn't enough to understand honor and duty, he had to live it. As they entered the bridge, the crew was already in motion. Officers were scrambling to their stations, inputting commands into the ship systems, their eyes glued to the screens as the unidentified vessel grew closer. Admiral, the unknown ship is within range, the sensor officer reported. We're detecting several weapon signatures. It's not responding to hails. Nix nodded sharply, her eyes narrowing. Prepare to engage, but do not fire unless I give the order. Reed stood off to the side, watching as Nix took command of the situation. She moved with confidence, giving clear and precise orders. Her crew responded without hesitation, their respect for her obvious in the way they worked in unison. Reed had seen leaders before, but Nix was something else. She wasn't just in charge, she was the heart of the crew. They trusted her implicitly, and that trust was what made them strong. Admiral, one of the officers called out. We've received a message from the unknown ship. It's in a language we don't recognize, but we're trying to decode it. Nix's expression darkened. Time is not on our side. Prepare the weapons and set a course to intercept. We will not be caught off guard. Reed watched, his mind spinning. He wasn't a strategist like Nix, but he knew that this was no ordinary encounter. The enemy ship was clearly armed and prepared for battle. He couldn't just stand there. If he wanted to prove himself, if he wanted to truly understand what it meant to fight for something greater, this was his moment. He stepped forward, catching Nix's attention. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Nix looked at him, her expression unreadable. You will assist the communications team, help them decode the message. If there is a chance of negotiation, we need to know what they want. Reed nodded, moving to the communications station. He sat down, his hands shaking slightly as he interfaced with the ship systems. He wasn't an expert in alien languages, but he had a basic understanding of decoding systems. His mind worked quickly as he typed in commands, trying to extract meaning from the jumbled mess of symbols on the screen. Minutes felt like hours as the tension mounted. Nix paced around the bridge, her eyes constantly scanning the screens. She was waiting for something, anything, that could give them an advantage. Reed continued to work, his fingers flying over the console as he focused on the task at hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the message began to take shape. The symbols shifted and rearranged, and Reed's heart skipped a beat as the translation became clear. It's a warning, he said, his voice loud enough for Nix to hear. They're threatening to destroy us unless we turn back. Nix turned sharply, her golden eyes narrowing. A warning? How do they know about us? Reed's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He glanced at the message again. There was a line at the end, something that didn't quite fit with the rest. He stared at it for a long moment before realization hit him. "They know we're Zentari," Reed said slowly. "They've been watching us and they think we're weak." Nix's expression darkened. "They underestimate us." Reed stood up, turning to face her. "What do we do now?" Nix looked at him for a long moment as if weighing his worth in her mind. Finally, she spoke. "We show them that they're wrong." She turned to the crew. "Prepare for battle, all hands to your stations. We will not be intimidated." The ship jolted as they engaged their weapon systems, and Reed felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the moment that would define him. This wasn't just about proving himself to Nix. This was about proving that he could stand beside her and the Zentari crew as an equal. He had learned their ways, their culture, and now he was ready to fight for them. The unknown ship loomed on the view screen, its weapons aimed at them. Nix's eyes were focused, her hands steady on the controls. She was calm, but Reed could see the fire behind her gaze. She wasn't just defending her people, she was defending everything she had fought for. And as the first blast from the enemy ship hit their shields, Reed knew that this was just the beginning. They were ready. He was ready. And together they would show the galaxy that the Zentari were not to be underestimated.